So this was not a video we intended to do. It was requested by one of our very, very loyal subscribers, and he wanted to know basically what are some of the things to consider when buying a brand new property from the developer versus buying a property which has been there for quite some time. Yeah, an existing property that's been there for a couple of years, 10 years, 20 years and so on. Yeah, and although we had specific plans in terms of the content we wanted to put out, we were happy to accommodate his request, because for us it's important to make property simple and relatable. Property education that we are putting out to be simple and relatable. Yeah. So when looking at this, luckily this is something that I have experience in specifically. I've done deals where I bought off plan from the developer, and I've deals which I bought some really old and not so old properties that's been there for quite some time. Yeah, and we figured, yeah man, let's do it. Let's add value. And yeah, that's where we are. Okay, so this question is for me, there's different ways of answering it. The one way in which I would like to approach it is this way though, right? Instead of telling you what to do, I would rather give you the framework or help you create your own framework in terms of how I look at these types of decisions and the framework I use in terms of the decision making, because ultimately you're going to make your own decision as to what works for you or not. Even though we all might have the same data in terms of what we are working with, we all ultimately reach different conclusions, and it's right that way. I quite like it that way, because everybody has their own drivers in terms of what's important for them. All right, so let me get into it. All right, so I'm happy to go into the details, the disadvantages, the advantages, but most of you guys can Google and find such. I'm happy to go into things such as, if you buy off plan, you're buying a brand new house, brand new property, and therefore you are unlikely to be spending money on repairs and maintenance for quite some time, for a few years at least. If you're buying a brand new property, you will most probably get warranty for quite some time. So it means, should there be any issues within the property, you're able to go back to the developer, and the developer is able to fix them for you. Buying a brand new property will, for the most part, also be in a sectional title, and as a result, your common areas are also going to be quite new, whether it's your pool area, your clubhouse and such, and other houses in the vicinity are also going to be new, which is going to help quite a bit in terms of maintaining the standard of the overall complex or estate, which is fantastic. Also something to consider, and what I'm seeing quite a lot of recently, is the fact that most estates now are energy efficient, so you're going to be saving quite a bit in terms of your utility bills, water, electricity and all of these, just based purely on the way the properties are built right now. There are some standards which are now forcing developers to be more and more energy efficient. Okay, there's numerous advantages to go in this route, right? There's also some disadvantages when looking at it. For instance, I am yet to find a brand new build whose rooms are bigger than, especially bedrooms, are bigger than an old existing property, for instance. So what tends to happen is, because the developer has a limited amount of space in which they're working with, they're trying to squeeze in as many of those apartments or clusters as possible within the same amount of space, and therefore maximize their return on investment, basically. Yeah, and also, like, when you're looking from a financial point of view, although you're going to be paying levies moving forward, you do save a bit of money, because you don't pay as much, if any, transfer costs, because you're not going to have things such as transfer duties, for instance, because they only apply if property is changing hands from one owner to the other. Okay. And there's quite a lot of these things. If you're buying an older type of house, you're going to get space, which is awesome for most people, especially for me. It's massive. And because you got space, you also have options. You're going to have lots of options in terms of what you can do with it, But for instance, the finishings are not going to be as nice as a brand new development, for instance, and therefore you would have to renovate and invest in that property in terms of making sure that you're updating the finishings so that they look nice and modern, because most of them are going to be old. These are going to be like 90s, 80s type of style of finishings, You're going to have bigger space, as I mentioned, and you are likely to be paying levies, because for me it makes sense for you to go a freestanding house, especially if you're going for something older, right? But ultimately, for me, it comes down to this, and this is important. There's a notion that says something along the lines of this. It's quite common, especially in corporate. You are paid based on the level of problems that you're able to solve, or you are rewarded based on the level of problems you're able to solve. And the higher or the bigger the problem you're able to solve, the higher the risk associated with the whole process, and the higher the return you are most likely to get. Yeah, and vice versa, obviously. And for me, this is one of those scenarios. If you look at a complex, for instance, which is newly built by a developer, right? This is something that the developer is the person that's taking the major risk. Yeah? They have to deal with the headache. The headaches. They have to deal with stakeholders, your contractors, with banks, with neighbors, for instance, in terms of getting permissions. They have to deal with all of these dynamics. With investors, for instance, they have to go and ask for money. They have to do presentations. There's a whole lot of things that they have to do to make sure that this happens, so that you, as somebody that's going to be buying from them, never have to worry about any of these things, right? And as such, if there's any reward or any massive reward that's going to be distributed in any way, shape, or form, is going to go to the person who has solved the biggest issue or the biggest problem in this regard. In this case, it would be the developer. Right? On the flip side, though, if you buy an old house and you renovate it and update it, for instance, you essentially become the developer. And as a result, the associated risk comes down on you. The associated headaches come to you. The associated problems, issues, people giving you issues come down on you. But also, which is very, very important, the reward, the potential reward, right? If you get this thing right, then you don't only make more money through forced equity, but you potentially make more money through cash flows. Because this is the whole idea around it, in my opinion, right? It's about getting into a suburb, and because a suburb, an existing suburb, especially a freestanding one, I quite prefer freestanding. A freestanding house that's been there for 30 years has already been paid up, right? It might not look great, it might have cracks, it might have outdated furnishings. Fine, right? But if you can somehow get it at, let's say, market minus 50%, for instance, and then you put in another 20% to fix it, then you potentially have an upside by way of forced capital or forced equity in the deal of 30%. And then on top of that, because of the way you configure it, you also have an upside by way of cash flow, which is simple for the income, rental income that you're going to be generating from the property, minus all the associated cost of running and maintaining and keeping the property over the years, right? And getting that profit that's referred to as cash flow in property circles. Forced equity is basically you raising the how can I say this? Raising the value of the property by fixing it, by forcing equity, so that it catches up to the rest of the market, and whatever the difference is between what you bought the property for and what you spent to fix it and what the property is now able to sell for is forced equity. So if, for instance, you buy a property for $1 million, you put in another 500,000 in it, and the houses in the area sell for 2 million, right? It means that 500, which is the difference between 1.5 in terms of what you spent, reduced from the 2 million, which is what the house will now sell for, is the forced equity part, which is money that you've created in the deal because you took advantage of the deal or of the property deal to make sure that you get the distance between what the property should be selling for based on what other properties sell for in the area versus where it was at, right? And what I also quite like about older types of homes is the fact that because of the history that they have, chances are even if somebody is distressed in some way, shape or form, they're able to sell you the property because they would have bought the property for a fraction of what they sell to you for, even though it is still half of what the market should be selling for in the area, right? So if somebody, for instance, buys property 20, 30 years ago for 200,000, right? And the properties in the area now with 2 million, but for whatever reason, they're not able to maintain the property or they need the money desperately, right? And they're able to sell to you for $1 million, right? Then it means that from their point of view, which I quite like about people, from perceptually, from their point of view, the property is it quadrupled? No, it has increased by value 5 times since they bought it, even though it hasn't. It is not selling for what the property should be. Properties of that size and nature should be selling for in the area. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. I hope I haven't confused you. But the essence in terms of what I'm trying to say is this: are you somebody that's looking for something which has no stress? Straightforward, you're going to get your rental. You are probably not going to be getting higher than anybody else. You may have to put in some money into the deal yourself in order to maintain the ownership of the property, but getting zero stress. Zero stress in terms of fixing it and repairing it and maintaining it, zero stress in terms of building it, or zero stress in any way, shape or form. You get a nice properly packaged property handed to you with zero stress, right? But with little or no reward for that zero stress. Or are you willing to go through the pain and the suffering so that you potentially have a higher upside by way of rewards? That is, for me, the key thing in terms of this whole conversation. My name is Said. I hope you find value in this. There's going to be more video segments, series coming your way, because the essence in terms of what we're trying to do is to add value all the time for you guys. Sharp.